Today we are going to discuss the largest incident of voting day violence in United States history. So let's get started. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Virtual History 360. I'm Mr. Wade, and I'm here to help you understand history just a little bit better. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with my newer videos. I try and put out a new video once or twice a week. Also, be sure to check out the awesome history merchandise like shirts, hoodies, and masks found in my Teespring store. Check it out. I'm going to put a link in the description for you. And be sure to stick around until the end of the video to hear about what Ocoee was like for 61 years after the massacre. But before we get to that, we should talk about 1920. Leading up to the presidential election that year in Florida, you have to remember that the 19th Amendment had just been ratified back in August, and a whole new group of voters were registering for the first time. Women in Florida. For every white woman who registered to vote, there were 10 to 15 African American women who registered. This caused worry among the white community as they pushed to get more white women registered. So now, let's put this into context. 1920 in America was the height of the Jim Crow era. Now, this refers to the segregation and disenfranchisement laws known as Jim Crow, which represented a formal, codified system of racial apartheid that dominated the American South after Reconstruction. So now, with African American women trying to vote, the push to keep African Americans from voting becomes amplified. Focusing on voting, the 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870 and said that the right to vote cannot be taken away based on your race, your color, or your previous condition of servitude. So, to get around that, laws were passed in the South that accomplished that goal without being overtly unconstitutional. For example, there were poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses written into law. Poll taxes were designed to burden the voters enough to keep them from heading to the polls. I mean, it was not a large sum of money. 100 years ago, we're talking $1, right? But it was enough that if you were poor, you would choose to buy the essentials, food and clothing, over paying to vote. This directly kept lower income citizens from casting their ballots. Literacy tests were designed to make sure people could read the ballot. That doesn't sound so bad, does it? But the problem is that the tests were rigged with questions that were just bad. Questions like how many bubbles were on a bar of soap, or how many marbles were in a jar. The test administrator could arbitrarily decide if the answer given was correct and turn away those who were determined to be wrong. I mean, take a look at this. Take a look at this example. It's from Louisiana, but across the South there were examples of this. This was a time test that was designed to confuse the test taker with tricky questions. Finally, there was the grandfather clause. This basically said that you were exempt from all of the other requirements to vote if your grandfather has voted in the past. But think about it. This is the first generation after the Civil War. If you were an African American, the odds were that your grandparents were slaves and therefore not able to vote. This is how Southern states got around the 15th Amendment. So now let's talk about what happened in Ocoee. You see, the story starts with a man named Mose Norman, who was a prominent landowner and businessman in Ocoee. He attempted to vote on Election Day, November 2nd, 1920, and he was turned away. So he travels to downtown Orlando, and he looks for and he finds and speaks with Judge Cheney. And Judge Cheney tells him to write down any name of any person who was denied the opportunity to vote, and also write down the names of those who are obstructing. If someone's turning away, write down their name as well. When he went back to the polls, things started to escalate. Somehow, Moses' shotgun ends up in the hands of the men guarding the polls. He fled, and the mob began to gather. They wanted to seek out justice. They heard rumors. There were rumors that Mose had hid out at his friend July Perry's house. July Perry was another prominent landowning businessman and member of the Ocoee community. So the mob of about 100 marched to his house to demand Mose Norman be surrendered. When they received no answer, they attempted to break into the house by breaking down the front door. This is when July Perry and his family fired their guns in self-defense. In the fray, 2 men were killed. 2 men were killed in the fight, but numerous others were injured, including July Perry and his daughter. July Perry was one of the injured, but he was able to escape when the white mob withdrew. For the next few hours, the white mob called in reinforcements from the surrounding areas, either by phone or by driving around to pick them up. And around dawn the next day, July Perry was captured by the mob and he was arrested. At first, he was taken to the hospital to be treated for his injuries. They wanted to get him, better or at least well before transporting him to jail. But the problem is he never made it to jail. A lynch mob intercepted him, dragged him behind their cars, and hanged him from a telephone pole. There, his body was used for target practice. His body was riddled with bullets before being removed and interred in an unmarked grave. So this is the immediate event. But the repercussions of this night lasted much, much longer. But before I get into that, I want to take you to the Orange County Regional History Center and talk about a special exhibit they have on display. All right, thank you. Yes, I am on scene. I'm at the Orange County History Center, and right behind me you see the historical marker for the lynching of July Perry. Let's take a moment, let's look at the exhibit inside the museum. So as you can see, just looking at it, the exhibit goes more. Obviously, it's not the whole thing. You need to go to the Orange County Historical Center, and it's well worth the time. I spent a couple hours here today. Come here, check it out. It's going to be this exhibit. Yesterday, this was home exhibit. Will be there until February 14th of 2021. So be sure to check it out. But take a look at this historical marker behind me here. This was not just a one-day thing. Obviously, the lynching occurred for Election Day, with the 2 men, upwards of 3, 4. We don't know how many because people were burned out of their homes, okay? So records don't exist, so we can only estimate the number. But the area was changed drastically for the years that followed, with the black families being drove out. I want to take you to one other place. Let's head there now. All right, I'm in Ocoee now, actual Ocoee, not Orlando, still part of Orange County. You see the marker behind me here. It says hallowed ground in honor and memory of the African Americans who called Ocoee their home. Remember, as you saw in the pictures, the massacre was just the one event that then led to African Americans being forced from their homes. So, because of that, this land right here, there were no African Americans living here for decades. The land behind the marker is fenced off. It's about an acre, they say, and it is believed to be a mass grave. They're working on doing the excavation and raising the money to do the research. So history's ongoing, right? So let's head back to the classroom. Let's continue the story. So as you can see, history is all around us. I mean, Ocoee is right down the road from where I teach. This is my own backyard. I'm sure that you can find history where you live as well. But this story is more than just one day or one man. What about after the initial violence of Election Day? What happened? The same mob I mentioned earlier set fire to the homes of the black residents of Ocoee. At least 20 buildings were burned down. People were chased from their homes and forced to flee into the orange groves and the sugarcane fields. They had lost all of their homes and were forced to find new places to stay. The only possessions were those that they ran away with because they could not return or go back to pick up anything else. We do not know the exact number of lives lost because of this event. There are official records for 3 men killed, but anecdotally, there could be as many as 80 people who were murdered during the massacre. That is why there's a marker at the second place I showed you. They are in the process of raising money to excavate in order to determine if that acre is a mass grave for those who lost their lives during the massacre. The African American citizens who were forced to flee that night, or the night of the massacre, they were also forced to sell their property. Because they were not given the option to keep their homes, they had to sell at a loss or face more violence. Every family gave up their land and started a new life elsewhere. And this leads into what I started the video with, and that is the state of Ocoee for the next 60 years. Ocoee became known as a sundown town. What does that mean? It means there were signs posted letting every person know that if you were not white, you were not welcome after dark. There were no African American families living in Ocoee, and if you were black, you were in town on business, you knew you had to leave as soon as you could or else face mob violence. It was not until the 1980s that census records show African Americans living in Ocoee. Today, African Americans make up approximately 21% of the 46,000 residents, but they are still overcoming the losses from 1920. Has anything like this ever happened in your area where you live? You might be surprised if you look close at your area's history. Since history is not always neat and clean or even good, the bad has a habit of being pushed to the side. It is important to study the good and the bad of the past. This is how we learn from our mistakes and make our current situation better. Tell you what, leave a comment below telling me what you think about families being forced out of their communities, or if you know of something similar happening in your area where you live. Let me know. While you're there, go ahead and hit that like button for me, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. If that button is red, let's click it and turn it gray. And be sure to check out my other videos like the ones you see on the side over here. I have other history videos, world and U.S. history. I also have civics videos, and I have videos shot in 360 that you can look all the way around. Check them out because I know you're going to like them. For Virtual History 360, I'm Mr. Wade. I'll see you next time.